Woman, an in-depth exploration of the world of women today with Sandra Elkin.
Good evening and welcome to Woman. My two guests this evening are both wives of alcoholics. They are not experts on alcoholism, but because they have been intimately involved with the pains and the process of rehabilitation, they speak with an authority that only someone who has been married to an alcoholic can have. In order to protect their identities, we will use only their first names, Margot and Carol. Carol has asked that we not televise her face. I thank you both for coming very much. I think maybe for purposes of clarity, we better introduce you as Margot and say that Carol is there. Margot, your husband drank a lot before you were married. Did that worry you at the time?
Not really. A lot of the people I knew drank, and I thought family life would settle them down, and our social life, there was a lot of drinking going on, and I thought that was normal. And like I said, I thought family life would settle him down and he would stop drinking so much after we got married.
Carol, what about you?
Well, my husband is in AA today, and up until the time he came into the AA program, I didn't realize he had a problem with alcohol. And I think a lot of it was because I, wasn't willing to look at the fact that alcohol was a problem in the home. Because now, in retrospect, I can see that drinking did cause a lot of problems.
How would you describe your marriages up to the point where alcohol entered as a problem? And what were they like?
Well, I think alcohol in our family was always a problem in our marriage, but I never recognized alcohol as the problem. Something was wrong with the children, they weren't behaving right, or I was doing something wrong, or there was something wrong at the job, or we had too many bills, or there were too many pressures from the outside world, and I never really recognized the fact that if we removed the alcohol, we would be able to cope with a lot of other problems. And so I always thought that it was everything else. Alcohol is such an acceptable pastime in our society that, alcohol wasn't the problem. It had to be something else. All of our friends drank, and of course we socialized with people that drank a lot. And it was a very normal existence. At least I thought so. There were sort of problems at home, but I thought it was everything else but the alcohol, the children, and a lot of other things.
Would you describe yourself as a typical suburban housewife?
Well, whatever typical is, yes. I raised my children. I did the best I could. I used to take them to art galleries, and I thought we were normal. I did all the same things my friends did. We went for walks with the babies, and my children went off to school, and I had the same feelings that all my other friends did. Some of the things that I did that I really couldn't label, that I really didn't know what was wrong, we never had dinner on time in our house. All my friends were having dinner at 6 o'clock or 6:30, and my husband never came home from work on time. I was always waiting dinner for him, or we would always make a scene at a party, or I was always sort of bitchy at a party because I was worried or concerned about my husband's drinking. It seems that a lot of my concerns were over the drinking. In fact, our whole life seemed to revolve around my concern over someone else's drinking.
In regard to that question, for myself, there are friends of ours who I'm sure would look at us as the typical, the typical happy family. And, there were happy times too, okay? There wasn't always arguments and strain and tension. There were happy times. We did a lot of family type things together, and we have children and young children at that, and we did, picnics and different things like that. But I think that beneath it all, for one thing, there was a facade put on, especially by myself. If we were at odds with each other and we were going out, I would be, really happy and smiley all evening and get back in the car and, really angry, and back to that type of thing. But I think that because my husband was a periodic drinker, and by that I mean maybe once every 6 weeks, maybe once a week. It varied, but not a daily drinker, as opposed to a heavy, obvious, involved drinker and it's really addicted at that point, you know, I didn't attribute it to the alcohol at all. I just felt that he, you know, he had problems, I had problems. We weren't communicating that type of thing. And yet, even when I would get angry, if he would go out and come in at 3 in the morning or something like that, still never realized that. I figured he just wanted to be out and away from us. I didn't think that he was, in fact, going to seek out that liquor. So I, you know, and again, as Margot said, we're very alcohol-oriented, and my husband certainly didn't stand out. As a matter of fact, he was less obvious in the crowd we hung with than others.
Oh, wow, that's incredible.
You know, another thing I'd like to bring out, too, was that another thing that really puzzled me was that when my husband wasn't drinking, he did many loving things. I knew he loved the children. I knew he cared about me. It was like a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde personality. When he was drinking, it was awful, and yet when he was sober, I knew that he was a loving, tender, kind person, and that really confused me. You know, I couldn't understand this back and forth, this terrible contrast, and it was very confusing to me.
It was that very thing, that very type of thing that brought my husband to realize that he is an alcoholic and brought him to AA, because he had a particularly horrendous experience with on New Year's Eve with drinking too much, and some things happened he didn't remember and that I had written down and said, you know, this is what happened, and I just, you know.
Oh, after it happened, you wrote it down?
After it happened, I wrote it down because I was going to leave. I just decided I couldn't, I feared for my life and I wouldn't stay, you know, any longer. But it's that Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I wrote in that letter, I don't know what happened to the man I married. You're not the man I married, and if I can have him back, that would be wonderful. And I think it was that opened his eyes too, and he realized, hey, I'm not the same person. What happened?
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that used to bother me was that I knew what a wonderful person he was, and I hated what he was doing to himself. I hated the fact that I could see him physically destroying himself. He would become physically ill, and mentally he wasn't able to function when he was drinking. And I knew that he was a bright, loving person, and I just hated what he was doing to himself physically.
Was there one, you know, really horrible incident, as Carol described?
Not really. There were a succession of incidents. Finally, I became so frustrated and upset. I had gone several places to seek help. I had gone to several ministers. I had gone to my family doctor, and no one seemed to understand.
What was wrong with the help that was offered you from, say, the ministers? I mean,
well, they tried to treat the marriage. They didn't treat the alcohol. They tried to treat other symptoms. There must be something I was doing wrong, or maybe he could straighten out, or they tried to treat everything else but the alcohol. And I have since learned that if you can find out the alcoholism, the part of the problem that you're dealing with is alcoholism, all the other things you can work on after you recognize that alcoholism is the problem.
I think it's important to mention here too that there is help for people living with alcoholics, or let's put it this way, there's help for people that are living with someone whose drinking is a problem to them. Okay, I cancel out the alcoholic that bothers some people.
When you finish, I want to say something about that too.
Right, and that there are Al-Anon family groups that are specifically for relatives.
Let's kind of take this in the progression, though, as it happened to you, and you know, where you finally did get the best help for you.
Well, finally, I became so desperate that I completely turned my husband off. I said, I don't care what you do, but I have to save myself. I just felt that I was going crazy or something. I didn't know what was happening to me. I was yelling at my children all the time, and I wasn't able to function very well at all. So I just completely turned him off. I said, I'm going to try and pull myself together. And he went for help. And he went to our minister, and our minister said, I can't help you, but I know who can. And he sent him to a program where he could get help for alcoholism. So then when I found out how to deal with the problem, and I learned the tools to use to deal with the problem, it was much easier for me, and I gained in self-confidence. I learned how to deal with myself.
Carol?
Right. Well, I specifically mentioned this New Year's Eve, and as a result of the things that happened that night, my husband sought help. And the priest that he went to happened to be familiar with the AA program. So he took him to his first AA meeting. And as a result, I found out about Al-Anon and went to Al-Anon and have found that this is a place for me. It isn't a place to go and worry about his alcoholism or his problems. He has to do that on his own. But it's a program that is set up to help people. It's a way of life. We have tools, we have steps, like the AA steps that, for example, step 1, I'm powerless over anyone but myself. I can only change me, which is an important thing. A lot of us struggle for a lot of years trying to change the alcoholic.
Let's talk for a minute about the struggle for a lot of years. What were some of the things that you tried to do, before you got help? Did you try to drink with your husbands, for instance?
Yes, I tried drinking. I tried practically everything that I can think of. If he would ever say anything, well, Margot, maybe you could change your hairstyle, or maybe you should make the children be a little more quiet, or if I could only have 2 martinis every night when I get home, and maybe we could eat about 8 o'clock, or many, many things that I tried to change to adjust to the drinking, and none of it worked. Absolutely none of it. My drinking, my not drinking, my going to a party with him, my staying home, my having parties at home, my going out and buying the alcohol, my not buying it, none of it made any difference. And finally, when I learned that the only person I could change was myself, and the only attitudes I could change were my own, then the change took place. Then some good things started happening to us.
Was there a conspiracy to protect him, do you think? I mean, were you part of that conspiracy?
Well, that's a very common pattern. I found for myself that even though I had no program or no people, and I didn't seek help. I was raised in a home where you kept your business to yourself. You don't go for help, and I didn't. And knowing that there were problems, let's say, in the marriage and in myself, I still didn't seek any help for that, not even mentioning the alcoholism aspect of it. But when something happened, for example, if he was supposed to pick someone up and didn't, I figured he was the one that didn't show up, and let him face up to it. Whereas oftentimes I've heard many people say that they in fact would call the boss and say he's sick and would cover up. It's very common.
I did some of those things. I would be concerned about the bill collectors. I would be concerned with many things that were not my problem. I would be concerned about whether he went to work or not, and I would call the boss. I would be concerned about some things that were his responsibility, and never occurred to me to stop doing those things, because I thought, well, he couldn't cope with it, so I better do it. If I don't do it, who else will? Which is really an ego trip, I mean, let's face it. Who do I think I am? The savior of the world or something, that I have to take on everybody else's responsibilities for them. That's as much as telling the other person.
That must be a very common reaction.
Well, I think it is. I can't talk for anyone but myself, but I think it probably is. When someone is drinking too much, they act like a child, and so I started to treat my husband like a child, and he wasn't a child. He was 30 years old or 35 years old, and I was treating him like a child, which is a very easy thing to slip into, I think.
One of the things I fell into was comparing our family life, and I'll say our relationship, to other families or other couples. And what I did was I picked couples that had a worse relationship, made me look good. So, I wouldn't pick a family that was really getting along and, had communication in there. So it made me look good. And part of the thing, too, is that oftentimes I thought, well, this one's husband does that. If my husband ever stopped after work, ever blew the paycheck or ever did this, I'd never stay with him. And yet as these things happen, you'd be surprised how easy it is to adjust to it. And then you say, well, if he ever did this, I wouldn't. And, it's a progressive thing for the people living with the alcoholic, as well as the disease of alcoholism being progressive.
Were all your friends very heavy drinkers still at that point?
First of all, we didn't have all those many friends at that time in our life, because there's a point, I think, that the social drinkers and the problem drinkers separate. There's a point of, let's put it this way, I sought out people that had problems as opposed to happy people, and we sort of zeroed in on certain friends. And yes, they were heavy drinkers.
But, you know, I thought all that was normal. I thought what was going on outside of our home was normal, the parties we went to and people drinking too much. I could always find someone who drank too much than my husband, or I could always find someone who was worse than I was to their husband, you know, because everybody knew why my husband drank. I was a bitch, and I was, but you know, I could always find someone that was worse than I was, which is a silly game, you know.
That's exactly what I did.
It's just goes along with part of the denial, I think, the not learning how to deal with the problem. Alcoholism, just the word, it's like a moral judgment. The word terrified me, alcoholism or alcoholic. You know, that wasn't anything to do with me. If you'd have said that we have heart trouble in our family or sugar diabetes or something like that, okay, that's an acceptable disease. But alcoholism certainly isn't an acceptable disease for me to be involved with. It's like a leper or something, really.
You know,
I thought it was just awful.
I got to the point where I took out all these, you know, frustrations and anxieties and things on my children, and of course felt extremely guilty for
Yeah,
it.
so did I.
And this is very common. I mean, just in hearing other Al-Anon members speak of this experience. And I was getting to the point too where I had always been a very outgoing person, and I was withdrawing from organizations and from that kind of thing, losing my self-esteem, and getting, you know, where I was taking things out. After this New Year's Eve incident, I got a phone call like 2 days later, and I was just, you know, really explosive to this poor innocent individual who happened to call, and, you know, had no beef with this person. But that's how upset I was, how frustrated I was. I had no outlet, I had no program, and no, you know, therapy to help me deal with these problems. And there's a lot of people that, you know, are experiencing this today.
So what do you do? What do you do with the anger?
Well, like Carol said, I took it out on my children, and or I turned it on myself. Either. I became guilty. If I would yell at my children, I'd feel terribly guilty, and so then I'd turn anger on myself, and I'd say, "You're terrible for yelling at your children. You're terrible because your husband doesn't like coming home from work. That's why he's out drinking. There's something wrong with you." There was something I wasn't doing right. Otherwise, he'd want to come home from work. Simple as that.
So you blamed yourselves a lot.
Yeah, it was easy for me to you know, think that certainly I did in a sense. I had problems, you know, emotional problems when I married, and I think that had I had my head on a little straighter, I might have sought help. You know, might have seen the problem right away instead of denying the whole thing. It's such a process when you're living it daily. It's really difficult to see it, and yet now hindsight, I can see that all the signs and symptoms were there. I just wasn't aware of it. And the thing about the program that I'm involved in is that it lays down guidelines. For example, there's a slogan, "One day at a time," that helps me to take, hey, I have this day and this day only, and let me stay in today and never mind what happened in the past, because for myself, I either lived in the future or in the past. I either dreaded the future or you know, was still bitter about things that happened in the past. And how could I enjoy my here and now? And so now I'm able to, you know, function and zero in on today.
Did you spend a lot of time asking why? What is the reason? What is the cause?
I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what I was doing wrong. Also, I'd like to bring out that there were a lot of good times. You know, every day there wasn't a major crisis in my house. We'd go for weeks or months, and things would go along fairly smoothly. But so, you know, when I sandwich it all into a couple of minutes, it sounds like it was all horrible, and it wasn't. But the times when things did go wrong, I blamed myself. I thought maybe there was something else. There must be just one more thing I can do to make things okay around here. And there just wasn't, you know, until I learned what I was dealing with.
What about your children at that time? Were yours too young to know what was going on, or do you feel that this had an effect on them?
Oh, definitely. I think that people that have young children and babies and pretend that they're not being affected, that's just what they're doing. They're kidding themselves, because my children, I had this big thing, I'm not going to argue, not going to fight, you know, none of this verbal hassle. And so I just wouldn't talk to them for 2 or 3 days, and the tension was so thick you could cut it. I mean, who was I kidding? Of course the kids were affected. And they sensed it, and they were frightened, I'm sure of it. And yet, that was the best way I knew to cope at the time with it. I just had this big thing about yelling and screaming and that being bad for the kids, and I just didn't see that my behavior and his behavior and our tensions were certainly affecting them.
Your kids were a little less ready to deny than you were, though.
Yes, as they got older, they were
Yeah.
more willing to face the problem, and they would go to their father and a couple of times and told him what he had done.
Yeah,
And
tell
he-
about one of those incidents.
Well, my son came home one day, and he didn't go to me and tell me the story. He went to his father and said that one of his friends had made fun of his father walking down the street. And if my son had come to me, the story would never have gone any farther, but he went around me and went right to the source. And it hurt my husband terribly, of course. And I think that's one of the things that helped him to face his drinking and to realize that it was a problem and to do something about it. And he did, shortly after that, do something about it. And so sometimes what we may think is a very unloving thing to do, to face someone with what they're doing, is the most loving thing in the world. That was a very loving thing for my son to do, and it was very painful for my husband to realize it, but it was one of the best things that ever happened.
So you would agree then, probably both of you, that the people who say that confrontation is good, to confront them with their problem.
Yes, not in a cruel way, because alcoholism is a disease and they're not doing it to be mean to another person, or they're not drinking to be mean to their families. If they had a choice, if they knew what they were dealing with, they would stop drinking, and they hate themselves more than they hate anyone else. So the kind and loving thing to do is sometimes say, I love you, but I don't like what you're doing. What you're doing is hurting us very
Or stop
badly.
covering up, stop. You know, I think of one story of a gal that used to pass out all the time, and you know, the husband would put her in the bed and she'd wake up all cozy and warm and the whole thing. And finally, he stopped doing that. He realized he really wasn't doing her a favor, and he'd leave her lie all night wherever she happened to fall. And she started waking up, you know, on the stairs or something like that, and she began to connect the fact that, wait a minute, I drank too much or whatever, I'm here, what's going on? And so that really, now that seems very cruel.
Yes, it does.
But it isn't, because it helped her to realize just what this liquor was doing to her, just what alcohol was doing to her. And she was then, you know, able to face up to it and do something about it.
Carol, it was not a long time between the time that New Year's Eve happened and your husband sought help, right?
A couple of days.
Yeah. What do you imagine that his first AA meeting was like for him? I mean, how did he describe it to you afterward?
Well, that's sort of interesting, because he, first of all, went and he came home. I wasn't speaking to him. I was in a deep depression that night. I really thought, wow, my world is falling apart. And he tossed AA literature on the table, or in the drawer. And I got up and you know, what's this? And it blew my mind. I looked at it and I thought, I've got to talk to this guy. So I did, and he said that he is an alcoholic and that he went to an AA meeting, and he said, these people are, you know, they're in suits and ties, they're intelligent. You know, I guess he expected, I don't know, some people that were really skid row, half drunk still. I don't know what he expected. And so he came home feeling very good about the fact that these people who you know, had all kinds of whatever levels of income, etc., had this problem, and they were making it, and they were happy, you know, and they were adjusting and working a program, and he felt that he could too. He felt very good about it, about the fact that he finally put a finger on what his problem was, and frightened, I'm sure.
What about sex? It certainly must have been a problem area at that time.
Yes, I think sex is a problem in an alcoholic marriage, along with a lot of other things. It's been a slow process for us to deal with a lot of our other problems. Sex along with it, financial problems, sexual problems, problems with the children, that we've had to face since we've been in a program of therapy.
Are you afraid that your children will be alcoholics?
I'm concerned. I'm not afraid anymore. That's one thing I don't have to be anymore, is afraid or alone. I'm concerned about it, and I think today I have many more benefits because I'm able to open my eyes and see what's going on. And if they do develop a problem, I'm able to say, I think you have a problem, maybe you'd like to do something about it, and here are some of the resources that you have if you so choose. And I think that's a wonderful benefit for someone to have, for my children to have the choice. They have the choice.
Right.
Carol, is that something that you're worried about?
No, I'm not really worried about it either. I'm realistic, though. I realize that, you know, they're doing research on whether there is a physical hereditary thing, and that could be possible. So that, you know, there is a real factor there. On the other hand, I feel, as Margot does, that, first of all, worrying about it isn't going to do me a thing, except turn me gray and waste my day. But most importantly is that my kids have the availability of help, that they are, first of all, going to have the awareness. I think that it's very important that people be educated, that people realize how addictions happen, and that if you're turned to alcohol and depending on it, and that they have all this information. And I feel that because of this, they at least have one step, you know, ahead than what we did. And the other thing is that they can, it's very open. I mean, as far as therapy goes in our home, we've had a lot of it, and it's been very beautiful, and it's spoken of very positively, not negatively. And I feel that this is important if they do have problems.
We
that
have
they'll
1
seek
minute
it.
left, and you wanted to say something about anonymity.
Yes. In Al-Anon and AA, we highly respect the anonymity of people, and this is why I am not showing my face today, because I am talking about the fact that I am an Al-Anon, and we do this because we want people to realize that if they're coming to our group, that we will respect their anonymity, and we are all there for the same problem. We don't feel it's a stigma or anything like that. A lot of people think that this is why we have the anonymity. Quite the contrary. It's just that we realize newcomers coming in, you know, it's a frightening word, as Margot said. And realistically, too, there is a stigma in the outside world sometimes if your husband's a doctor or
But
something.
you both, I just need one word from you. You both feel very hopeful, though, about the future.
Definitely.
Yes, there's hope.
I thank you both, Margot and Carol, for being here. I thank you for watching, and see you next week.
Production funding provided by public television stations, the Ford Foundation, and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.